Welcome to the 452nd episode of the Jami Dulaney Plant-Based Wellness Podcast. My name is Jami Dulaney, and I'm your host. I'm a plant-based cardiologist and endurance athlete living in Southwest Florida. Thank you for listening. Today I have a guest, Mel Weinstein. He is the author of the book Fast Food Ingredients Revealed. Mel is a retired chemist, and he has also been a chemistry and teacher at community college. But he talks about being a food addict to a food fanatic as far as the ingredients, and he developed an interest of what is in our foods. He worked initially for Tate & Lyle, which is an industrial food ingredient manufacturing firm, into the 1990s, so he knows what goes in things that are on the store shelf. He decided to take a deep dive into ingredients that are in fast food restaurants. And it's quite apparent that, there's a lot of ingredients, it always comes to mind. Everybody is familiar with, 36 ingredients in a chicken McNugget, for instance. The food industry took took a turn for the worse probably in the 1960s with the invention of the Swanson TV dinner. And, took Mom out of the kitchen one night a week, and people would have the TV dinners and watch their favorite Gunsmoke or whatever. And then, pretty soon we started getting, fast food restaurants that people would get a meal when they were traveling with, and then it became dinner. And a lot of people eat the majority of their food from a fast food drive-through restaurant. A lot of people get the majority of their food from even takeout restaurants. And now with Uber Eats and things like that, you don't even have to go out. You can order in, virtually every meal, including Starbucks, that you want. So you have no control over the ingredients that are in the products. I can date myself, but one of the first low-fat products that came out was Snackwell cookies. And the idea was that if you did low-fat, it would be a way to snack without adding calories and to decrease the incidence of heart disease, because a study came out that if we decrease the amount of fat in our diet, then we could possibly decrease cardiovascular disease. But the Snackwell people were, and I believe they're made by Nabisco, but they were pretty smart. They really didn't decrease the fat as much as increase the sugar, so the ratios change. And if you look at a Nabisco cracker, a Ritz cracker, over the years, the amount of fat didn't really change, the amount of sugar went up. And so low-carb people will blame sugar, but the fat was still there, and the fat was causing a problem before it all started, but now we've just made it more calorically dense by adding sugar to a product, and then always binders and softeners and things to make things last longer and longer and longer on the shelf. So the question is, what does your body do with all these additives besides, the basics? Some may get passed through and metabolized by the liver and passed out through the feces and the urine, but a lot of it actually gets stored, and we store most of our toxins in our fatty tissue, just like fish do and animals do. Over time, that leads to more and more inflammation, and of course, more and more accumulation of toxic compounds can lead to abnormal cell formation and cancers and whatnot. So, we put so many things in our storage units of our cells that we don't even know what's there and how they interact and how they actually cause problems as we go. But we know for sure that in places where these things don't exist, they do much better. Most foods now have to contain ingredient labels that list every ingredient in the food, but often it's in small print on the side of a package, written in white lettering that makes it hard to see in the lighting of a big box store. Most of us don't have time to read the ingredients. We might take a quick look at the nutrition facts label, which is also somewhat misleading because it is per portion size, which we don't take into account how many servings are in a box or a bag of things. We don't take into account that the ingredients, or the nutritional values are listed in weight, not in calories. So it's hard to tell the actual percentage of calories that you're getting from fat, sugar, carbohydrate, and so forth. So sometimes 2 grams of saturated fat doesn't look that bad, but 2 grams of saturated fat, 18 calories, and there's only 20 calories per tablespoon per serving, then you can see it's almost all fat. When your friends tell you, your friends that aren't plant-based tell you that you're eating genetically modified soy or you're eating a lot of vegetables that have pesticides on them, one of the things that you can say is that if they're eating box foods or takeout food, they are consuming genetically modified corn products, whether it's in the thickeners, the additives, the starches, the softeners, genetically modified soy. So whether not only in the oils that are in the product, but the binders are in the product. So over the years, again, the process, the basic ingredients of some of these things have changed, where some thickeners were derived from plants. Now they're more of a chemical enzymatic process that they can be made industrial in high amounts that, again, our bodies don't know what to do with. So I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Again, the book is Fast Food Ingredients Revealed. So without further ado, here's Mel Weinstein. Enjoy the podcast. I'd like to welcome Mel Weinstein to the podcast. He is a podcaster as well, and a chemist. But we're going to talk tonight about his book, Fast Food Ingredients Revealed. What exactly are you eating? And, I alluded in the intro that you're a chemist and you've worked behind the scenes in some of these food ingredients. So you kind of can enlighten us firsthand about the backside of some of these things. So I think it'll be quite a fun and interesting conversation, and we can keep it pretty light. But you started your book from being a food addict to a fanatic. So tell me a little bit about how you evolved from being a chemist to now an advocate for people's health through what's actually in the food.
Well, I grew up in the 50s and the 60s, and I was a typical American kid. Sugar was king. And I had a huge sweet tooth as a kid, and I ate pretty much all the wrong foods back then. Anything that was sweet, that runs the gamut. From sodas to cupcakes to you name it. Ice cream, anything that had some sweetness to it, I grabbed onto, and I ate like that all the time. And there wasn't really a lot of restrictions on that. Sugar at that time, there were some people talking about how it wasn't good for your health, but there wasn't a campaign against it. So, my parents basically said, don't eat any junk foods before supper, and that was good enough. But, I could eat any kind of junk I wanted, before then or after supper. And so, I was pretty much a junk food junkie. And I remember that when I went to elementary school, there was actually a candy store across the street, which, I made a lot of trips to. And I'd get out of school, walk across the street and just enjoy myself in that candy store. So there weren't very many limitations, as I said. And it wasn't until I got into my 20s that I really thought about what I was eating. And I came across a book called Sugar Blues. I don't know if you ever heard of that. It came out around 1976, 77, sometime in there. And it railed against sugar. It really smacked sugar around, telling you it's not good for you. Stop eating it. Don't make it a mainstay of your diet. Have it occasionally. That's okay. But, really watch what you're eating. So I did that for maybe a year. And then, my bad habits, my little addictions came back. And I didn't think about sugar until much later after that.
So you you taught chemistry at a community college level, and you actually taught applied chemistry, which is, I think really, really interesting because, and as a little background, I don't know, I was a chemistry major before I went to medical school. And the only reason why I was a chemistry major was that I heard through the grapevine that the dean of biology didn't like pre-med students. So that's what led me to be a chemistry major. That was the thought process.
Yeah.
But I really, so I went through general chemistries and organic and such, but biochemistry I thought was fascinating. And I could have, that very much interested me, the biochemistry aspect of things. And but anyway, I went on into medical school and forgot all of that, and then have circled back with plant-based nutrition and come back to my biochemistry roots, so to speak. But then you worked in industry, and so you kind of knew how they made some of these things. You alluded to, I wanted to, talk early. You were in the, what was it, was it in the 70s that you were in the additive industry? What year was that?
No. My career to pass, I got interested in teaching chemistry, and that lasted for about 12 years or so between a couple of community colleges. And then I started working part-time for a local company. It was actually called A.E. Staley's initially, and then it changed hands, and a big British conglomerate by the name of Tate & Lyle purchased it, and this was around 1990. So I worked for that company for 20 years, retiring in 2010. Now, probably most people have never heard of Tate & Lyle. They're one of those companies that's behind the scenes. They don't advertise themselves very much. What they do is they produce food ingredients for all the major food manufacturers in the country and the world. And a lot of those food ingredients are food additives. So having worked for them for 20 years, I got quite familiar with a lot of the ingredients that wind up in highly processed foods. Now, that company was primarily focused on corn, at least in Illinois, where I was working. And so a lot of products, unbelievable, a lot of products come from corn, just hundreds and hundreds of different products. And so, I learned, not as you said, not only about what these ingredients were, where they wound up, but, what was the function of them. And, one kind of rule to follow is nothing winds up in a commercial food without a purpose. It's there for a reason. And it may be a good reason. It may be what you think is not a very important reason, but it's there. And food companies are not going to waste money putting anything in their food products. And when I say food companies, I'm talking about commercial foods. They're not going to waste any money on anything that doesn't have to be there.
And at what point, so you mentioned corn and then soy was another one, but corn, at what point did the corn become, more of a Roundup, non-organic, highly, GMO type corn?
That would have been, let me think for a moment, probably in the middle 1990s, maybe 1995. I mean, the research had been done, but it hadn't hit the marketplace. I'm talking about the Roundup Ready corn. So it was beginning to infiltrate the commodity food industry at that point. And, I was working for a research center at Tate & Lyle. So when something new came along, particularly if it had to do with analysis, I was an analytical chemist. So when GMOs hit the scene, I was tasked with the job of looking into that new technology and trying to figure out, well, how do we test for it? It was a whole new area for a food ingredient company to get into. And so I learned as much as I could about it. There were just a handful of labs in the whole country where you could send a sample to and ask for what was generally a very good estimate as to the amount of GMOs that were in corn, for example. And so, I kind of helped set up a testing program. And at that time, it's very different now, but at that time, there were objections being raised to GMOs being in food products. And so this company I worked for, Tate & Lyle, they decided that they would basically have two different streams of corn coming into their company. One would be non-GMO and one would be GMO. So they had to contract with farmers who would agree to make either or actually, they were more concerned about the non-GMO because there was a demand for it at that time. So they had to contract with farmers to agree that they weren't going to plant GMO corn. And so whenever, these big trucks came in or rail cars came in to the plant, a sample of the corn had to be pulled and tested. And they did not like for that to take a very long time. So they were very interested in a test that could be run in a matter of minutes. And so that was one of the things I got involved with, is finding test kits that can do very quick testing of GMO corn. So the deliveries could be verified on the spot. The truck would be sitting there waiting, for the test result to come in.
Mm-hmm. And did it shift over your career more towards the GMO corn?
Yes, definitely. I mean, that went on for a few years. It kept a lot of people's jobs alive, because a lot of testing had to be done. But as GMOs more and more became accepted in the United States, and I don't know if that's really the right way of saying it, as the controversy over GMOs became less and less and less, then people didn't get very concerned about that. And so the company eventually decided they didn't have to separate those two strains of corn anymore. So, and that happened probably 2 or 3 years in.
So it would be fair to say that in the mid-1990s, most processed food products that contained derivatives of corn or soy probably were genetically modified.
Actually, probably not. I mean, initially the GMOs had to they had to prove their case. That they were. The claim was that they were no different biologically, other than the introduction of a foreign gene that would make them herbicide resistant. They had to kind of prove that they were safe, so there were people looking at it. So initially they made a small inroad, but over time, like today, you don't hear many people talking about GMOs, do you? They're the mainstay. I would say greater than 80%. I did see a graphic recently that showed a very, very big curve, from, say, the 1990s, and it's going up, until it got, over 80%. And I think in the case of soy, maybe 90%. Don't quote me, but, much of those commodity crops are now GMO.
Meaning that they are exposed to a whole lot more glyphosate and herbicides, because that's what makes them easier to increase the yield, because theoretically, you can spray them more. So
there's two controversies. One is actually what's inside the corn, the genetic modification itself. And that was the early concern. And then, as you point out, the later concern is, okay, now we got free rein to spray Roundup Ready glyphosate on these crops. So, what about the residues? What kind of problems are associated with that?
And, I think that there probably is, something to be, but I guess, when I hear in the plant-based world, when people are not plant-based, they often say, well, you eat, your products have such and such and such on them. But I don't think people realize that when you're reading in the middle of the store, the things that are in the box and the preservatives in various foods, fast foods, as we'll get to, those all have been exposed to quite a bit of glyphosate and are probably genetically modified.
Yeah.
And that's a huge change, because you talked about in your book that, again, 1960, we get a TV dinner. And then the 70s, we get McDonald's and Kentucky Fried Chicken and maybe a Burger King. And then, progress on. And a lot of people eat every meal from one of these places.
Yeah.
So the exposure becomes, higher and higher.
That's true.
One of the things I saw, you worked on a thing called sucrose polyester, olein.
Yeah, I didn't work on it. I talked about it, in the book. It was another company, Procter and Gamble, made that.
And it was kind of to make things low fat, so to speak, a fat substitute, but it caused tremendous GI cramping and diarrhea. And, they actually came out with a diet pill that was based off of that.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. So one of the first, after fen-phen, got taken off the market for all its problems, then they introduced a drug that acted very much like that pulled fat. So if you ate fat, you didn't digest it. You just pulled it out of the, into the intestine. So people had massive GI cramping and diarrhea and things like that. And so you could lose weight, but you were losing weight
in the wrong way.
Becoming sick, more or less.
Yeah.
The other thing, you talked about early on, before we get into the fast food, you talked about Dannon yogurt. You showed some of the ingredients and, just in foods that people think are healthy. They're going to feed their kids. People that eat yogurt are, healthy people. Right.
You got to be careful. The U.S. government did us a great favor, when let's see, when was that? 2010 or so, when they required the label on all commercial products to list the ingredients. Before then, it was optional if a food manufacturing company wanted to reveal what was in their products or not. But with the newer food labels, you got the nutrition label, which was a good boon too for people who bother to learn about it and use it. But the ingredient list, is wonderful. If you want to take the time, there's a couple of things. If you take the time to actually, when you're picking up a container in the grocery store and actually see what the ingredients are, and then to kind of educate yourself about which ingredients are okay, which ingredients might be bad for you. But in the case of the yogurt, it's got some good properties that people are interested in if you can tolerate the dairy, which I can't. But it's got some healthy elements to it. It's got the protein, it's got the probiotics that are in there. And if that's all you see and that's all you care about, and you don't look at the rest of the label, you're not going to see other things in there that you might not want to be eating, because every food product pretty much has a lot of research that goes into it. And that research addresses what that product tastes like, what it looks like, how stable that product is, how that product is preserved over time. And all of those things need other ingredients to provide, those properties. And so when you look at a yogurt container, you don't just see two or three things, milk and flavoring agent or whatever. You see a whole bunch of ingredients, possibly. Now that spans a range. Different companies have, I would call better products than others.
What are some of the worst things that we should look for in a product on a store shelf? That's a huge. But if you had, what would be your top 10 maybe top 5 things, if you saw it, you put it right back, or maybe you had some, do you have a definite no list?
I do. I just put out a podcast episode. My podcast is called Food Labels say that again. Food Labels Revealed. And so the latest episode addresses essentially the rules to eat by. And I put out, I don't know, something like 13 rules as to what to watch for when you're eating processed or highly processed foods. So some of the things that come to mind is, and some of these are pet peeves. One of them is if you're reading a food label ingredient list, well, first of all, know that the first ingredient you come to is the one present in the largest amount. And then as you go down the list, they get smaller and smaller in amount until you get to the end. That ingredient is there in the least amount. So if in the top of the list there's something that doesn't look right, that doesn't sound right, it's there in, maybe a much larger amount than most of the other ingredients on the list. So that's one thing. Then one of the pet peeves is if you find an ingredient that is an acronym, like TBHQ. First of all, the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, and don't ask me why they allow this, but they allow food companies to use acronyms on the label, which I think is just unconscionable. Because you're looking at this acronym, TBHQ, for example. You don't know what that is. Unless you're a chemist, unless you work in the food industry or a food scientist, you're not going to know what that is, or unless you've taken the time, to look things up. So, why food companies can get away with just listing acronyms, I don't understand. Now, somebody might claim, well, these acronyms, it would take up too much space to put them on the label. Like TBHQ stands for tertiary butyl hydroxyquinone. Okay, that's a mouthful. And that's a name, only a chemist like me would like to say and be interested in. It happens to be an antioxidant, but most of the acronyms that I've seen on labels generally are not the best ones to be in a product. You may remember, Dr. Dulaney, BHA and BHT. They were very common. That was the one of the main preservatives. Those are two different chemicals, BHA, BHT, and you'd see them all the time on commercial processed food labels. And BHA is a butylated hydroxyanisole, and BHT is butylated hydroxytoluene. So again, those are long names. You're not going to see them, usually not see them spelled out on the label. And they've had some knocks, from the health industry. I think that's why you're seeing them use less and less on food labels, which I think is a good thing. A couple of other pet peeves: if you see the words natural flavors or natural colors, I wouldn't trust that food. And those phrases are used all over the place. Very, very common. Same, with the natural color. And the reason that's not a good thing is because they're not telling you what those flavors are or those colors. And so you have no idea. I mean, it could be one flavor or one color, or it could be a mixture of things. And so you really have very little information to work on. And if you have, a sensitivity to one of those flavorings or colors, you wouldn't know. I mean, you'd be eating it and have no information that this is going to affect my health. And so those are not, I think, a very good thing. And let's see, what else? You may have noticed, what's that?
Datem.
Oh, you're talking about going back to acronyms. Oh yeah, that's one of my favorite. It's about 5 words long. But I was going to mention another one that's quite common is modified food starch. Have you seen that?
Yes.
And that's a totally nondescript term. Yeah, it tells you there's something related to starch in that food. But modified food starches, and they could say corn starch, wheat starch, whatever starch they happen to be using. Those are additives that are made through physical processes or through chemical processes. That's what the word modified means. And it's not a single ingredient. It's again, a combination of ingredients, some of which may be okay, some may not be okay. But they get this umbrella term that food manufacturers get to use on the label, and they don't have to reveal, where it comes from or why it's there.
In the running industry, I don't know if you're familiar with, some of the products. They make gels that
I'm not familiar. I'm not a runner.
that are, each company has their claim to fame on how they get sugar in a little packet, like, a little bit twice the size of a ketchup packet, and they're all about 100 calories. But their claim to fame is they have different starch sugar forms. And one of the big ones, maltodextrins.
Oh, that's another one to look out for you. Very generic.
And they claim that that's like, well, that's a good thing. And again, it's
you can make an argument there. It's probably better than cane sugar or beet sugar.
Well, and slower
digesting.
Digestion, is that what it would more likely to do? Or that's
essentially what a maltodextrin is it's partway between being a sugar, pure sugar like glucose, okay, which comes from corn, or I should say dextrose. Either word would apply there. So when in the plant, corn is broken. The starch component of corn is broken down into sugars, okay? And it's done using acid, it's done using enzymes or a combination. And then as the process proceeds, that starch gets broken down more and more. And if you allow the procedure to go to the very end, then you wind up getting the glucose or the dextrose. But in between, you can stop the process and isolate the starch after it's only been partly broken down. And, that gives you an array of maltodextrins. Okay, so you're looking at something which can either be not very sweet or at the other end can be fairly sweet. Okay, and so there they can say, there's a lot less sugar in it. You're dealing with something that still has some properties of starch, and therefore it is going to break down slower in the body.
It comes down to, absorbable, what your body sees. If your mitochondria sees a carbon and a hydrogen and an oxygen from, I guess it comes with to me, the process, the more acids and the more chemistry you have to do to get to a product, potentially the more byproducts that you have. Is that correct?
I would say generally speaking, I would also say that the FDA has no problem with maltodextrins. So, they're okay with it.
I don't know that I've used the FDA as my benchmark for what's actually good for somebody.
There are things to say about that.
But it is somewhat amazing how, some of these products, and again, they're fancy words, but it turns out that for the most part, they're chemistry experiments. And if you're trying if you're running a race and you're trying to get glucose into your cell, I don't know that, slowing it down, there's variations on that theme, you know what I mean? As far as different products, because when you have something that if you take a belly full of starch, on the other hand, you may, end up pulling a lot of water in from your gut as well, and having a problem. So, it comes down to it's just a little different way of marketing. Of course, then they add all these flavors to things, artificial flavors. And so
the processed food industry is very good at marketing their products, finding a niche and a new industry. If it's long distance running, that's become more and more popular. They will find a way of making something they say will benefit.
So getting to the book, Fast Food Ingredients Revealed, what's kind of shocked you? I mean, over the years, things have, I guess, evolved probably, but the making of foods, I've heard of the pink slime, the chicken McNuggets with 36 ingredients, one of which is chicken. Tell me a little bit about what you found in doing some of that research. Did you find that, to me, I always worry about as a human, our body knows, and you alluded to this, before 1960, you had a potato, a carrot, a beet. You might make bread that was, end up using the starches and doing a little bit of chemistry, as bread is a little bit of a chemistry product. But for the most part, we didn't have a whole lot of additives on our plates. And now we have these, when we metabolize something, we have leftover byproducts. And what does our body do with these leftover additives? And,
we're a bit of a chemistry set when it comes to what we eat.
Yeah, and so your liver can only, if you're eating fast foods and you're taking 4 medications, how is your liver handling all these different chemicals as well as, pharmaceuticals that people consume every day? So
one of the things that shocked me, I didn't talk about this in the book, I don't think very much, but as far as I know, there aren't any studies being done on the interactive effects of all these chemicals. Yeah, there's got to be some studies done to, assure that they're going to be safe to eat, and they're going to set some limits how much can appear in a food, some upper limits. But who's asking the question? Okay, we're eating these foods that have hundreds and hundreds of additives in them. Some people are eating that every day. What is the collective effect of eating all these chemicals? And like I said, I don't think there's anybody really asking that question.
No, I mean, and it's there's 50 ingredients and things like a flour tortilla, or some of the, if you go to, or you had Taco Bell is one of the places that you looked at, the nachos or the grilled chicken, whatever. I mean, they're basically chemistry experiments.
Yeah, the book got launched in my brain after a couple of years. I was doing my podcast and I came across a couple of food items from fast food restaurants, and the ingredients in those foods were available, and so I started to look at them just like I had been looking at various food products in grocery stores, big box stores, convenience stores. And so the question popped up in my mind, okay, are they the same or are they different? Is the fast food industry using something different that I'm not very aware of? And so after looking at a few fast food restaurants, I thought, well, I'm going to see if anybody's written anything on this subject. So I scoured the internet, and there's lots of books about fast foods, but a lot of them have to do with fast food addiction, fast food history, studying the founders, and telling stories. But I didn't find any book that talked about in detail the ingredients in fast foods. Now you can go online and you can type in what are the ingredients in McDonald's French fries. And you might find another organization that has that information or says they have that information, but do the fast food manufacturers actually provide it? Okay. And I did a little search I had about 25 different fast food restaurants I selected, and I did a search to see which ones actually reveal that information online. And I think I came up with something like 12, so or maybe 8 or 9. So it's roughly a third of the companies I looked up actually told people who were curious and went to their website to get that information, told them, what was in all of their products, their whole menu. Now, interestingly, there is no legal requirement for a fast food company or any restaurant, for that matter, to tell you what's in their food. Now, on the other hand, there is a law that says fast food restaurants need to reveal the nutritional information for every item that they sell. And you may not see that posted in the restaurant when you walk in, but they're required to provide that information if a customer asks for it. Now, it's limited to chain restaurants, okay? So you're not going to get this information from your local mom and pop restaurant. That's a kind of a one-off kind of restaurant. There has to be at least 20 restaurants that share that name, and they have to qualify as a chain restaurant. Then they're required to provide people with nutritional information, but not the ingredients. So if you find a restaurant that does share its ingredients, that's on a voluntary basis. And so when I decided to write the book, there's hundreds of fast food restaurants, but very few of them reveal their ingredients. So I had to look up the ones that did that, and then like I said, I came up with maybe 8 or so, 10. I had to decide. I can't cover all the menu items in all these restaurants, even though there were maybe 8 or 10. So I wound up selecting 3 restaurants that fit the bill. They had to be major, national, international restaurants. They had to be big players, and they had to be kind of representative of what Americans eat. So I chose McDonald's for kind of American food, Pizza Hut for Italian food, and Taco Bell for Mexican. So over a period of a year, I gathered the data from those 3 restaurants. So I listed all of the menu items, and then I broke down the menu items into component parts, like, in a hamburger, like a Big Mac or something. You've got the bun, you got the patty, you've got the special sauce, pickles, etc. So it got broken down into those categories, and then each of those types of foods were broken down into their ingredient list, just like you'd see on a label. And I wound up, just in those 3 restaurants, looking at over 300 menu items. So what became clear right away, this is a very labor-intensive effort, and I was glad I only picked 3 restaurants, but it took a long time to break down all of that data.
Did it help you break your fast food addiction?
Oh, well, I ended that a few years ago. Every once in a while I'll go to a fast food. I'll try to pick fast food restaurant. I'll try to pick one that's a little higher on the list. So I like bean burritos. So, I'll go to Taco Bell, maybe a couple of times a year. If I don't have any better choices and I'm really hungry, I may stop at Subway, because they have a bit of a health halo, over their heads. But I did a whole podcast on Subway, and it's not as healthy as you think. They use a lot of the same ingredients.
No, I mean, you can smell it it doesn't smell like bread. It smells like chemistry when you walk in there.
I try to choose the best bread, but it's not whole wheat, unfortunately.
No, but I mean, all of them are made because they're soft and they last. Anything that is shelf stable with those, additives.
Yeah, and many people think those breads are made on site. I think I used to think that, but the breads are shipped there pre-made, already frozen, and they just have to bake them.
They're just thawing them, so you get the aroma from the thaw of the baking of the bread. Yeah. Again, it comes down to when you look at the book and you look at the list of ingredients, and some of them being, it comes down preservatives and stabilizers. And you mentioned the Twinkie experiment. People have done the McDonald's fries or the McDonald's burger experiment. I actually, I have 2 Oreo cookies in a jar here that I've had for about probably 15 years that still look like an Oreo cookie, no mold, no nothing on them,
probably don't taste like an Oreo cookie anymore.
I haven't tasted, I don't have enough guts to taste one. I'm going to see how long they last. But, the fact that things last that way, you wonder how you actually can digest them and where those products actually end up.
Those preservatives are pretty powerful, aren't they? They do the job.
And, so the question is how, over time in our exposure to preservatives, what is going to happen? What about things like you see, let's look, and I know it's not really the subject of the book so much, but it does come up in some things, guar gum and locust bean and, some of the thickening agents that are used in plant-based alternatives.
Right.
What do you think about those over time?
The stabilizers? Most of them are from plants, either land plants or marine plants like seaweed, so they have a good starting place. Depending upon the processing of the original materials, their health benefits, may decline over time. So that depends upon the particular stabilizer you're looking at. Now, when I worked for this company, Tate & Lyle, they made xanthan gum, which is very common. You can get that from a natural plant, but it was manufactured. Okay, so that's a key point. Is it natural? Quotes around natural, or is it manufactured? And so the xanthan gum, that I tested as an analytical chemist, it had gone through lots of individual steps to get to the final product. And the final product's probably very similar to what you get from the natural product. But what was it exposed to along the way? First of all, it was a process that relied upon the modification of a bacteria. And that bacteria was modified in such a way that it would be kind of forced to produce that gum, that actually produced a small amount of it, but then it was engineered, to produce much larger amounts that would make it cost effective to put it through a manufacturing process. And so, once it made its thing, then that gum had to be extracted. It had to be purified through various manufacturing processes, so it was complicated, before the final product was made. So what do you want? Do you want something made in a factory, or you're going to try to focus more on food products that come from nature?
Even I've talked on the podcast before about, the sugarcane juice. So we can grow sugarcane in Florida, and you can juice the sugarcane, and you get a green juice out of it that has a lot of antioxidants and actually has health benefits.
Yeah.
But if you take that and go through the quite laborious chemical process, end up with cane sugar.
Yes.
And, you've taken all the goodness out of it and probably added some benzenes and some other things to it that, result in something that's probably not so good.
Yeah. Cane sugar is pretty complicated. The first time I looked at that process, I was kind of surprised. I think there's maybe 15, 20 industrial steps that have to be followed before you get to the white powder.
The interesting part about cane sugar was originally sugarcane was grown in New Orleans and they were going to make cane sugar out of it. And it was, like you say, it was so complicated and so laborious that they just gave up and made rum. It's a lot easier.
There you go. More direct process. Huh?
A lot easier to make rum than it has to try to get down to a white sugar. So what's your takeaway on all this? Where should we go as a people? Are you okay that, it's like, what do we do? Is this contributing to obesity? Is this contributing to ill health, cancers? Are we accumulating what do we do?
Yeah, good question. As an individual, I don't know there's a whole lot you can do other than to stop supporting, those kinds of food products that have a lot of additives in them and are questionable for your health. But as a society, I think there is some big steps can be taken. The last third of my book, the third section, let's call it, dealt with answering the question, okay, if you're eating a diet, that's high in junk food, and a lot of the word you hear a lot these days are ultra processed foods, which are the foods that are highly industrialized that we've been talking about, that are made in factories. Are those going to deleteriously affect our health over time? So I did some research online. I wanted to find some recent studies, say the last 10 years, that actually supported that argument that ultra-processed foods, the shortened name is UPF, or the acronym, so I'll use that from now on. Will a diet high in the consumption of UPFs cause you to have bad health over time, cause you to come down with, say, lifestyle-related diseases, coronary heart disease, stroke, cancer, and or even just shorten your life. And so I found a number of studies. I chose 10 of them to write about in the book. And across the board, the conclusions were a definite yes. And most of these studies were associative. They weren't proving it with mechanistic type of proofs, but they were associated. So these studies would be huge. They might take 100,000 people and study them over a long period of time, maybe 8 years, 10 years. And they'd have these people report what they were eating during that time period. They might take the first year or two of the study to get a baseline, before they started paying attention to the data they were collecting. So these people in the study, they'd have to report what they were eating. That information would be picked up by the researchers in the study, and they would essentially categorize the different foods that people were eating. And they might have a category. Well, you may have heard of the classification system called NOVA. It's NOVA. It's used quite a bit these days. And they take a food and they want to know, there's like 4 groups that food could fit into. So the first group 1, are foods that are either unprocessed or very lightly processed. So use an example of an apple. Okay, so you pick an apple off the tree. A lot of people just eat it right there. Okay, that's an unprocessed food. Other people may take that apple, they want to wash it really good to get the dirt off. If there's any dirt on there, try to get the pesticides off the apple. Okay, it's still essentially an apple, right? By the time you're done. So you might call that slightly processed. Okay. The second group in the NOVA system are called culinary ingredients. When I first saw that, I said, what are they talking about? Culinary ingredients. Well, it's anything, just think of your kitchen. It's anything you would use in your kitchen to process that food into a dish that you want to make. So culinary is referring to herbs and spices, things to, kick up that food, get taste better. Those are considered, generally okay, right? And then the third group is a combination of group 1 and group 2. Now, the third group is, okay, we're going to make commercial products. We want these things to last. So they are going to have some preservatives, because when we put them on the shelf, we don't want them to deteriorate very quickly. And so as we go up in group number, we get to worse and worse foods to eat. If we're really paying attention, most of us would be okay with group 3. All right, it's not too bad. But then you get to group 4. Group 4 foods are what I call industrialized foods. Many of their ingredients are made in factories. And these are the ultra-processed food ingredients. And these are the ones you need to watch out for the most. So these studies that I selected to talk about in the book are looking at the data being collected and separating them into these 4 groups and looking to see, well, how much are people eating of these ultra-processed foods? And then correlating that data with the medical data that they were collecting. So they may be looking at how many people had heart attack events, stroke events, how many people came down with cancer, how many people were dying younger than they probably should, what was their mortality statistics. And so pretty much they found that, yeah, there's an impact on those particular criteria, the more UPFs that you ate. So they may report, for every 10% increase in the amount of UPFs consumed, there might be a 12% increased risk of heart disease. So that's generally how they reported the results. So yeah, the definite conclusion was yes, you're harming yourself if you choose to eat a lot of junk food and a lot of fast food, or even just eat a lot of food that to you might seem to be okay, but has a large number of these ultra-processed ingredients in there. Now, another thing in my book, if you've got a little bit of time, I already had a breakdown, all the ingredients in all these 3 restaurants. And so what I did was I asked the question, how would I label each of these ingredients? Would I call them unprocessed or slightly processed? Would they be moderately processed, highly processed, or extremely processed? And so I tagged each ingredient, and that was a bit of a chore too. But what made it a little hard is that I couldn't pull up a book anywhere, and turn to potato chips, for example, and it would give me the level of industrialization of that food product, or I should say, look at the ingredients. Let's say the oil that was used to make potato chips. It wouldn't. There's nowhere I could go for that information. So I basically made up my own system based upon my experience and my chemistry knowledge. I tagged each ingredient with one of those categories. There's 5 categories. And then I came up with a little mathematical equation that I could plug in. Well, how many unprocessed ingredients were in this food? How many moderately or extremely processed ingredients were in this food? And I came up with a number. And the number, the way I worked it, was the number was a percent. It was called a processed food index, or PFI. And it went from 0 to 100%. 0 being, this is a great food to eat, very unprocessed, go for it. All the way up to 100, which meant stay away from this. You're taking your health and you're threatening your health by eating something like that. Now, most of the fast food restaurants weren't down there around 0. The actual cutoffs are like 0 to 10, 11 to 20, 21 to 30, and so on. Most of them fell in the middle. Okay, so maybe the PFIs were in the 30s or 40s or 50s. I didn't see any that were up in the 80s or 90s. But even the ones that went up to the 40s and 50s, I classified as extremely industrialized and would advocate for people not to eat those. Now, like I said, that was my own system. There are other people who use the Nova system, but that's, that's performed in a little different fashion. But you asked the question, what can we do in society to help people answer the question, should I or should I not be eating this commercial food? And so what I looked at is, are there countries in the world, or are there companies in the world who actually have a scoring system for commercial foods? And I found there's lots of companies, like maybe lots of countries, maybe 10, 12 or so actually had a label that, now unfortunately, the requirement was not mandatory. It was, most of the time it's voluntary, right? So they didn't go as far as I would like to see it, but there would be a label on the front called a front of package label that would have a scoring system, and maybe A through E or a number system, where a consumer could pick up the box and they could look at that score, look at that label, and see what score that food product has. So it was from 1 to 5, and 1 being the best, 5 being the worst. They could say, okay, this has a number 3 on it. I need to make a decision. Should I eat this or not? Is it going to be good for me? But if it was a 1, they may not hesitate. They don't have to turn the box around and try to understand and scrutinize and figure out what a nutrition label was telling them or what an ingredient list was telling them. Somebody else was doing the work for them. All they had to do would be to look at this very simple scoring system. Now, the other part of that is I think there should be 2 scoring systems. So when you pick up a commercial food, you should see one for nutrition, and then you should see another one for how processed is that food. Yeah. Now you have 2 pieces of information.
Yeah, I guess that would be great. Unfortunately, none of us can agree on what is ultimately good nutrition. There's quite a variety.
Yeah, there'd have to be a whole group of.
For the average, the average consumer, I always counsel my patients, members, if the ingredients, the longer it is, the better the chance is that you're going to get into something that you don't. You want, so again, back to the example of bread. Bread is flour, water, and sugar, or flour, water, and salt, for the most part. But Wonder Bread is, has a whole lot more involved.
That was my favorite as a kid. I don't eat it anymore.
Right. There's, and mainly because this, the soft food industry is really, and I think that's the other thing that's a problem is that most processed foods end up making something that's actually very soft, pliable, easy to digest. And of course, with flavor enhancers, makes us overeat. So you don't have to work to eat it. And it's designed.
Do you know why? You know why they make those products softer?
Don't have to work to eat them.
Well, so many of us, eat we don't sit down to meals. A lot of families don't, so we kind of grab our food, eat it while we're on to the next task. And that makes it a lot easier to digest, right?
Perhaps, but yeah, I think I do. You can eat, certainly, you can probably get down 4 slices of Wonder Bread to 1 slice of homemade bread. You know what I mean? As far as that goes, you can get down order of French fries easier than you can get down a baked potato.
Right.
On and on and on. But I think that's the process. But there's actually been some information looking at the jaw development of kids, and that we don't eat anything we have to chew. And I hear it over and over again. It's like it takes too much time to eat, or chewing is difficult for me in the case of kale or something along those lines. Rather than in cabbage, rather than something that's going Kentucky Fried Chicken coleslaw that's been sitting in mayonnaise and marinating and all. You know what I mean? So
Right.
it's yeah. So
And the longer we get away from eating those kind of healthy foods, the harder it will be to get back to them.
yes,
We've conditioned ourselves.
absolutely. Well, I think the book was very revealing and really, really interesting. So, I'll make sure I put links to the book and certainly your podcast. I just kind of noticed that, and I'll be tuning in. So,
Great.
And good luck. I think you're doing a great service for people to get people more aware of what they're actually eating as opposed to eat now, ask questions later, maybe.
Yeah, that's the purpose of the book, is to kind of raise awareness, and hopefully it'll get in the hands of more people for that purpose.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, Dr. Dulaney, I appreciate you having me on. It was fun.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed the interview with Mel. Again, he has a podcast as well called Food Labeled Revealed. The name of the book is Fast Food Ingredients Revealed. Hope you check both of them out. It's always nice to get as much information to support your food choices as possible. It helps you to stay on track and proceeding on your health journey as you would like. If you're interested in finding out more about our practice, please go on over to drdulaney.com, DoctorDulaney, and check it out. You can email me at Jami@drdulaney.com. Would love to hear from you. Thank you. We've got our 1 million downloads, so I'm not sure how many years it's been going on, but 552 episodes later, we got 1 million downloads, so I'm really happy about that. A lot of you have been listening a long time. I appreciate that very much. Share the podcast with your friends. The first of the year, I believe we're going to have a new educational opportunity with the practice that is more of an online opportunity, so stay tuned to hear more details. Thanks always for listening. Thank you. Bye.